Hello, everyone. Welcome to Service Year Alliance's webinar on best practices for engagement and finding mutual fit candidates. Today, I want to go over a few kind of household items before we jump into the webinar. At any moment, you can chat or put Q&A, any of your questions towards us, or if you're having problems with audio, we will try to troubleshoot as much as possible. And also, I wanted to mention that this webinar is part of a three-part series. This is the middle one, part 2. The first one was a webinar that we did back in February, and in the chat box now, a link to our resource hub where we have that video and that recording. It is a premium access resource, and so you'll need to log into the resource hub in order to access it. And just a reminder that for Service Year Alliance, the login for the Resource Hub and serviceyear.org are different. So if you're having any issues logging in to view that webinar from the first, that resource from the first webinar, there is support on Resource Hub that can help you out with that. So today's is about best practices for engagement and finding mutual fit candidates. That first one was on really awareness, recruitment, and just getting set up on serviceyear.org. So today's is really about utilizing the full features from an organization point of view on serviceyear.org, and then some of interviewing tips and tricks. So our presenters today are myself. I'm the second photo, Brian Hall. I'm the Associate Director of Organizational Learning here at Service Year Alliance.
And hey, everyone. I'm Jonas Kane. I'm our Associate Director of Certification. I get to do a lot of work at Service Year Alliance with helping with user engagement on serviceyear.org and helping to make sure that our host organizations can maximize their usage of the platform.
So before we dive into the subject matter today, I just wanted to review what we'll be reviewing. We're going to kind of do a quick overview of the first webinar, some of those kind of high-level things that we've heard from programs and also we find useful to just know going into the recruitment season. Then we're going to really dive into finding candidates on serviceyear.org, reviewing those applications and resumes that you get through your candidates on platform and really how to follow up with them. And really then we'll kind of end the session today with just general tips and tricks for following up, interviewing, and selecting your candidates and getting ready for the year.
Great. So to start off, we did want to circle back on a few of the major themes that we covered in the first webinar in this series and talk about some of that awareness and recruitment information to highlight major themes we've heard and things that we've also heard from programs that either seem to be working well or on the flip side don't seem to be working so well. Thematically, one of the big things we have heard from programs in terms of approaching recruitment on the whole is that a really major plus can simply be taking the time to document your recruitment strategy and to be able to pinpoint what some of the major assets, areas for growth are. So regardless of whether you have a fully documented plan or you've got some of those things in different pieces, we've just heard that actually taking the time to map that stuff out can sometimes help you do a good audit of what you already have in place and see where some of those areas for growth can be. And similarly, getting member and alum involvement in that process in some way, whether they're directly supporting recruitment or giving some feedback and insight into that is something that we've heard can be very beneficial from a process standpoint as well. In terms of overall trends and themes we've heard of items that have been working, the first one will likely come as no surprise to many of you who have been recruiting for some time, and that's that word of mouth continues to be a really successful strategy for being able to get people in the door, knowing what service year experiences are, and helping to refer people directly into opportunities. We've also heard that there can be a lot of benefit from college and university engagement, though with the caveat on that that's really when you have a tailored audience or tailored experience that has a little bit more focus to it. Definitely like the mantra of posting far and wide, whether that's through us and serviceyou.org, through the AmeriCorps portal, through Indeed, through Handshake, but diversifying some of those spots where you're getting the word out there to help build awareness of your opportunities, utilizing your existing network, and then building off of what we mentioned on the last slide, making use of your members and alums as a strategy for recruitment as well. In terms of some things not working as well that have stood out, so we've said that engagement on universities is something that can go well. What we have heard, though, is that a lot of career fairs, when they don't have as much of a direct focus, and when it's approached more as a tabling event, can sometimes be a little bit more hit or miss when you don't necessarily have a defined, engaged audience in front of you. And the other thing that we would throw out in that space is that digital recruitment can be a bit of a mixed bag if there's not necessarily either the funds to put a campaign out or the right level of planning to be able to put in to do that. So while we obviously think that digital can be a really successful recruitment strategy, it is one that's not necessarily the easiest to get off the ground and get up and running. Also, just some general themes we've been hearing from folks about ideal candidates. Major things that we're hearing across the board, I don't think these are going to be too surprising to most people as well. Willingness to learn, people that can work well in team environments and have some experience having been in those previously, as well as people that in a variety of different ways have a service-oriented type of personality, either through having had a lot of volunteer experience, having things that come across in interviews, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but really just as a major theme, that's one that stood out. And then some definite challenges that programs have been highlighting, being able to find quality candidates who aren't just accepting applications, but are actually staying up until day one, serving through the entire year is an ongoing challenge. And then beyond that, simply capacity in this space, whether that's having the money to spend on everything that you'd like to in your dream scenario, or simply knowing that staff time is something that can always be something that you wish you had a little bit more of to actually do some of this a little bit more effectively. I am seeing there's a question up about a posting on Indeed.
Basically, the question is that somebody found their listing through Indeed, but they didn't post it there, but you know, because the service years are not full-time jobs, so how, you know, some of those kind of maybe misconceptions as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great flag all around. So obviously, what we've built out with serviceyou.org specifically is trying to get people in who have the right mindset coming in, that they're doing a year of service opportunity. And we've obviously pushed out a lot of best practices in terms of guidance for talking about opportunities and doing that. I can't necessarily answer the question about how something would have ended up on Indeed, but like I would say a major thing, if you are looking at posting somewhere outside of our platform, outside of something that's a little bit more tailored like the AmeriCorps portal, that is where you're getting into that territory of wanting to be extra careful of working in some of that language that helps set up what a year of service looks like versus what an open-ended job looks like. So moving along, we just wanted to start by kind of like framing what we're going to cover today in the overall context of recruitment planning. So we look back at how we had framed this in the initial webinar. We kind of came up with those 6 stages that thematically are a way you can think through the overall progression of creating and putting into action a recruitment plan. We went through stages 1 through 4 in that initial webinar. The main focus we're going to be talking about today is picking your ideal candidate and some things that can come across with that. So in terms of picking ideal candidate, we're going to talk a little bit about actually making sure you know how to review candidate information and get some of those key attributes that are going to help you find the person that could be the right fit to continue pushing through your application funnel. To start off with, though, one thing that we did want to spend just a little bit of time on, since we were not able to cover it in depth in our first webinar, is thinking through some ways you can also help build that pipeline up a little bit more beyond strictly having a posting that people are reacting to. So one of the ways you can do that is through using the Find Candidates feature on servicetier.org. So if this is not something you've used yet, there's a couple of different ways you can engage with this. The first is through our Find Candidates feature, which will automatically suggest some matches of individuals who have created profiles and are looking for opportunities to do a service here. Along with getting those automatic matches suggested to you, you can also take a look, if we look at the next slide, at doing a general open-ended search, basically of everyone who has signed up, is looking for opportunities to serve, and has added their profile information as well. You can do a filtered search of all of these folks on a variety of different areas. This one I always like to highlight. It's kind of great because you have a little bit more control on different areas, including being able to filter who signed up most recently. So if you are using this feature throughout the coming months, that's one where you can help cycle in new people to look at as well. And regardless of whether you're going through the Find Candidates feature or using that general search, you can learn some information about someone, review their information to see if they might be a good fit to apply, and use that Recommend a Listing button to extend an invitation. You'll get a confirmation when that happens. And the lower right-hand corner just kind of shows a quick screenshot of what that invitation is going to look like on the members' end. They'll also be given that link to go back and review your listing to help determine if that could be a good fit for them. In terms of actually reviewing applications, regardless of whether or not you're using that feature or simply have someone who's found your listing either through a suggested match that the system has given them or through doing an open-ended search, we wanted to talk about what that experience looks like for actually reviewing applications and resumes on servicetier.org. So first, just wanted to highlight that there's three main ways you can get to the key candidate info you're going to be looking at. Whenever someone actually applies to your listing, you're going to receive, if you have set yourself as the listing point of contact, an email notification, just like what you're seeing in that screenshot. That's going to give you a direct link back to view that candidate's details page, which we'll look at in just a moment. Along with following the link from that email, you can also just go directly into your dashboard at any time to view both that candidate and anyone else who has applied. So if you go into that core member section of your dashboard, you'll see that candidates tab, and we'll have a variety of different filters that you can also place to find either that individual person or someone else who might have already applied. And then beyond that, if your organization has more than one listing up and you want to look at just who's applied to one listing, so say you have different ones set up for different roles or for different regions, you can also go into your listing summary page to get there. So if you go to your listings tab, instead of clicking that edit button that you're going to see beneath your listing name, you'll notice that you have a hyperlink directly on the listing name itself. That's going to take you to a summary page that gives you a handful of different pieces of information. Most importantly, in this context, you're going to see a list of every single candidate who's applied to your opportunity. So any of those tabs, again, you can take to get into this key candidates detail page, which is really where you're going to be able to react to all the information you've gotten and also start to think through following up with the candidate. So some of the key links you're seeing on this page, if we start at the top, you can see a link that goes directly to the candidate's profile. You'll also see a link that goes off to a PDF of their resume that you can download and review. And you're also going to see a link directly to their service year application that you can take a look at. One thing to highlight in terms of the service year application itself, there's going to be the required fields that are pulled in off of individuals who have applied that are going to appear on every single person who has applied to any opportunity. There's also the ability to put in custom questions when you're setting up your listing. So if that is something that you've taken the time to add to your listing, when you're reviewing someone's service year application, you're also going to see answers happening to those as well. And I am seeing a quick question come in that asks about if you have a separate application that's happening. So something we had talked about a little bit in our first webinar in the series as well is the fact that along with getting our required fields and also getting any information you might be getting through these additional questions, you do also have that ability to customize what somebody's next steps after applying look like. So this is all information you can collect and get directly through the system. But if you are linking to another website or another application portal, or just want to give extra guidance about other things that members need to send, that's also something that when you're creating your listing, you're going to have that ability to put all of that information in about what else you need candidates to complete. And again, when you're reviewing that that application that someone has submitted, you'll see all of that general information that appears on there. In the lower portion of the application, you're also going to see answers to any application questions that you've added. And the one other thing that you could see is something that we added in that's currently optional, is a statement of interest. So everyone has on their profile when they create it a more general why I want to do a year of service statement. We also added in the ability for individuals to add a statement of interest specific to the listing that they're applying to. So this is currently optional for candidates to complete, but if they have added that in, that's also an answer you're going to see show up on their application as well. So that's just a little bit in terms of how to get to and review information. Also just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking through what following up with candidates actually looks like. When you're getting to this space of reviewing and deciding if someone's going to be a good fit to follow through and continue in your application process, there's a couple of key ways you can look at doing that. One of these is specific to serviceyear.org, but you can also think of this as overlapping with how you might be following up with candidates who are applying to your opportunities more generally. So that includes the ability to use the message button that you're going to see directly on the candidate details page to follow up with them. You'll also see beneath the person's name, their email, and if they've added a phone number, that will be on there as well. That same information is very likely to also be on a resume that they've uploaded as well. So curious, for folks that have joined for today's webinar, if you do have any primary strategies that you're currently using for following up with candidates, as we're continuing to go through this, feel free to send some of those along. And in particular, if there's any you think that are going well for your program so far. But on the next slide, we'll take a look at what messaging actually looks like. So if you are looking to do that direct engagement through the platform itself, you can click that message button, which is going to start a threaded conversation with the candidate who's applied to your opportunity. So they'll get an email notification when you send them a message that lets them know that you've reached out to them. They'll be able to follow a link from that notification they get. And just as you'll have a threaded conversation on your side that shows your entire conversation history, they'll get a very similar view through their own personal dashboard. So that can be a great way to think through when you've reviewed someone's information, taking that as your next step to follow up directly through platform. In terms of how to actually think through using messaging and follow-up, definitely think of this as a next way to be coordinating next steps that are happening with candidates. one of the obvious things to flag, if there was the question earlier about what if we're guiding people somewhere else, need them to complete other information. Very likely this should be information that you've already added in your listing. So definitely also to the second point that's on here, be thinking of this as the first personal touch point that you can be having with a candidate who's applied to your opportunity. So along with giving them that extra info about next steps, this can also be that initial place where you're inviting them to learn a little bit more about your program. And it's also really the first place where they're likely hearing directly from someone at the organization they're applying to. So definitely don't think of this as having to be strictly a process-oriented type of follow-up. This is definitely something you can structure in a slightly more personal way so that on the candidate side, they know that there is a real human on the other side who's reacting to what they've submitted and is interested in following up with them on next steps. The other thing that I'll just add in this space is I've mostly been talking through this in the context of candidates who have applied. You do also have the ability to message and follow up with people that you've recommended listings to. So if you see someone that looks like a really great candidate to apply, you send them a recommendation, and it's a week or so later and you see they haven't followed up, that could be a great chance to go back in, send them a personal note, and make sure that they didn't miss what you sent the first time, and that they really know that you are interested in seeing them take that next step as well. And in terms of the question that I'm seeing come in via chat about adding a link off, again, that is something that currently, if you're going to be using that, when you're setting up that next step section in your listing, you'll be able to sort of do a combination of a narrative, so framing if you need them to go somewhere else, to complete another application, create another account, whatever that next step might look like. And we do have that ability to include a URL with that. So when they're actually getting that pop-up modal, they'll see all of that guidance up front that you've given them. And their main call to action they're going to receive is to actually go off and do whatever you're directing them to complete.
And just to pepper that question, the question was, can you link off to My AmeriCorps portal if you're taking in applications that way? And the reason that we have it so broad is not every program is using My AmeriCorps portal for their application process. So that next step is to give a variance to allow every program to utilize the system that they are using to go off platform.
Yeah, and definitely our goal with setup overall is to be going towards things that are beneficial across the board to programs, while ideally striking that right balance between customizing and making sure that it's working for everyone. But also I'll say over time, for those of you that have been using the platform for longer, you'll notice that we've made a number of shifts over time. So as you have thoughts, ideas, all stuff that we always love to hear as well. So this one, I think we've talked about a little bit as well, but just keeping in mind any of those next steps that you've already provided. So basically, in this part, mostly just flagging, as I said before, don't think of any messaging or follow-up you're doing as doing an exact copy-paste of what might already be in there. Really think about this as the personal touch point where you're still giving them that nudge, but you're also surrounding that with a little bit more of inviting them to learn more and actually inviting them to take that next step in a more personal way. And the other just quick flag in that area, you will also be able to see on a candidate's card, if you are providing a link off somewhere, you'll be able to tell both if they've followed that link that you provided, as well as the exact date when they last clicked the link that you provided. And then just a bit of practical guidance to throw in. So as you have candidates applying throughout your application season, you can also, as you're reviewing, a lot of what we were just talking about is how you're following up with candidates that you are moving forward and are progressing through your funnel. Whether immediately you know that someone's not going to be a good fit to continue, or if after you've started to take some of those next steps, you've made that determination that it's not going to be a good fit, just practical things to do to help keep your dashboard up to date is to keep in mind that you can be declining any candidates that you're no longer considering for the role. Currently, I'll flag, we don't send out any specific communication when you take that step of declining. That could be an opportunity, though, if you wanted to send a personal message to someone that might not be a good fit for your program, but encourage them to continue looking for other opportunities. That's one way that you could think of working in a personal message to let them know you've reacted and they're not a good fit for your program, but that there are a lot of other programs out there they could consider. Alongside that, as you're processing candidates, alongside the external messaging you can do, we have also built in a more light-level internal note system that you can use. So if there's things that you just want to help track about follow-ups you've had with candidates, if you have another colleague who's looking at info on that candidate, that can be a spot where you add a bit more info as well. And then just the quick high-level thing I'll flag in this area as well is that along with declining people, when people actually successfully go all the way through your process, you will have the ability to enroll them into your position as well. So that one we're not going to spend time on in this webinar, but will be the main focus when we're talking about ways to keep folks engaged from when you accept them up until when they start their service. So for the next part, we're going to be talking about some high-level tips for following up, interviewing, and selecting candidates. And for this part, I'm going to pass it back over to Brian, who's going to talk through some of the themes and strategies we'll share for this section.
Thank you, Jonas. And before I kind of dive into this, I'm just curious, I'm going to ask a question of the attendees online, and just something to consider if you're viewing this webinar post you're reviewing the recording, is, I'm curious to know how programs utilize either existing core members or alumni in their interviewing process. So this next piece is, you found your candidates, whether serviceyear.org or your recruitment fair or on My AmeriCorps portal or wherever you found your candidates, and you're bringing them in now to interview them. And this really is kind of, I think, going from you've got all these quantity of applications, now you're narrowing down the quality and finding your ideal candidate. And curious just how, again, you utilize existing core members or alumni in that interview process, whether you're utilizing them if you get feedback after they become core members of how the process went and you amend your interview process, or you actually have existing core members and alumni in your interview panels of the candidates that are coming through. So I'm going to keep going forward with the slides, but if you want to type those into us, that would be great. Just curious to know that how people are utilizing core members and alums. I want to come back to the recruitment plan again, as we did at the top. Just to, review of where we are before we go into this interview stage. Again, we're here at stage 5, really picking your ideal candidate. And a lot of this has to do with going back to stage 2 of identifying who that ideal candidate is. And Jonas at the top kind of gave some general ideal candidate characteristics that we see across the field, but you really want to take those general ones and then really what are you looking for. So here in the interview phase, really want to tie that into finding your ideal candidate. So this kind of bridges from where Jonas stopped, which is just to remember all these things that you're already getting in. So you can add these 5 questions to your application. You need a writing sample. And just really determine what you're collecting on any platform and your platform and what does that all equate to. And really ask yourself, what do you actually need? And some of those I actually need it is because CNCF is requiring it, or you really need it because you found that that question really leads to an ideal candidate coming through the door. So just really, before you get into the interview process, really asking those questions. The next piece is just, you know, kind of going to Jonas's piece is just really be responsive and personal. We know that it's not everybody's 100% full-time job to do recruitment, so that can be variant, but really trying to get to a 1 to 3 day business day turnaround, and also really, you know, making that personal touch. And when you are doing that personal touch, we have found, and we've heard from candidates who have gone through our program, that not just simply repeating your next steps is a really, you want to like give a personal kind of, oh, this is a little bit of our program, or here's an alum story, so you can kind of see what your experience would be, instead of just reiterating the same things over and over again. In setting up the interviews, you know, we really want you to return back to your recruitment plan to know what you want to interview for, and really accept candidates based off of what you're looking for, which most of you, I'm sure you do. One of the big things we found ourselves at Service Year Alliance is really great new technology like Calendly or Acuity scheduling can really save time if you set that up in your calendars. So then you're allowing the candidate to choose times when you're available and they're available. And we found that a lot of people are using this in time saving to get the interviews scheduled quicker. And just be consistent with interview type. I'm curious to know if programs do this, but we found that if you have remote candidates that you're going to interview, having a video conference to mimic as close as possible to an actual in-person interview seems to make the candidate feel really special. Also allows the program to see, you know, in real time what some of those relationships look like. I would say in this next piece of creating interview questions, we say don't reinvent the wheel for Service Year program. There are some differences, as we all know, really around benefits, stipends, and like what service means and some of the language that we use. But, you know, many of you are organizations that hire others, other positions, and then really start there. And we say this because we have heard from some people, they kind of start creating a whole new process that may be different than their own, and really some of those processes that we use to hire positions, just regular positions, can be used for this process as well. And then just use your position description. At Service Year Alliance, we really find that a well-drafted position description can go a really long way. And can really help you in this position, in this area too, for questions, and also giving to the candidates in the interview so they know what their service is going to be like. I'm going to stop here because one of the things that we say is use currently serving corps members, and so I want to see some people say that they do have utilized corps members, so College Possible is using 30-minute corps member Q&A afterwards. Some using Skype to kind of have that face-to-face. Sorry, scrolling issue. So it does seem, as I look through some of the responses, that people are using corps members and alum to some degree. I think it's easier to use corps members because they're in your program versus calling on alums to come back and help you with the interviewing process. But we really have found this as a best practice. So if you aren't, it's something to consider as you look at this year's interview process, and something to incorporate.
Yeah, and I think the scroll, unfortunately, was not working well, but I think one of the other ones we saw come in was from Blue Engine about being able to have a lunch flash Q&A session with currently serving members. So yeah, definitely something anecdotally we've heard, whether it's being able to have a current member sit in during a session or have them involved in some sort of process basically involving a Q&A where they can help respond to questions. That's just always something that can be helpful when it's worked in, because the way you ask a question to someone who's currently serving and can react to it might help them learn about the opportunity in a little bit of a different way from talking to a staff member.
Yeah, and I also got the scroll to work, thank you. We also had just like after they're about to extend the offer or say we're going to accept you, another program gives the opportunity to speak one-on-one with a current core member. So this is a really great way, again, as Jonas and I served as well, it's really great to hear from somebody who's in the service of what their experience is going to be like, and it really can get you excited for your service as well. So definitely during the interview, just giving a summary of your program. Again, some of those additional service year support things like stipend and budget and relocating if they are really important to say in the interview. And then the last bullet is just to really think about what's absolutely necessary to talk about when AmeriCorps direct service capacity building. These are things that they will learn in your onboarding, and so don't go too overboard in the interview process, but enough for them to understand what they're getting into when in their service.
Yeah, and I think the quick thing I would add on that is this really is meant to echo similar type of guidance we tend to give around crafting a listing description and how you're really thinking through branding your program. And not getting like too in the weeds with jargon that they don't necessarily need to know upfront, but will gradually learn throughout the year. And making sure that they're getting the key details about your program to help know if it's a good fit, both on a practical level of what they're going to be doing during service, as well as the like actually knowing that it's a year of service and knowing what the benefits look like, but not getting like too caught up in any more insidery type language.
Mm-hmm. And I'm rereading the Skype comments, and I think it's a really good one from Lori. So this is, they use Skype, but they're getting from candidates that's not so up to date, and you should use like FaceTime or Facebook Live, some of those things. And I know that we are all in our lives really busy, and so it's hard to stay on top of the most current technologies. But this is something to consider. Why we were recommending Calendly or some of those services for scheduling meetings is a lot of young people are used to some of those applications and really gravitate towards them. So this is a way to get young people really engaged in your program if you are kind of using some of the newer technologies sometimes. And the last piece, and I'm curious on this one too, just as a question out to everyone, is it doesn't have to be a very formal rubric, but we've heard from programs that some are using a rubric to figure out who their ideal candidate is during their interview process, and really have, we want the candidate to hit these things, these are the qualities that we want in our candidate, and so somebody's filling out a rubric and even after the interview to select their candidate. So curious if people are using that and if that's being successful. But we've heard from several programs that this is helping them kind of narrow down and stay even true to themselves post the interview of like, this person would really fit well in with our program and with the other core members and our team, so on and so forth. We've also, the kind of service year thing here is really when you're selecting your candidate, is really thinking through the individual, and many of you are placing multiple core members at either a single site or at host sites. So thinking about how they're going to do well with a team dynamic as well. And then just here being thoughtful of your own biases as you select your core members and following up in a timely manner. I think everybody, this is kind of a employees market that we're in. And so following up and somebody feeling like, oh, you heard them and there's a process moving forward can really get them to accept for your service your position. So I'm going to check the chat and Q&A really quick before we finish out here. But this next slide is just really to get ready for the year. And this is Jonas and I kind of saying, if you take away nothing, here's 8 things from this webinar that we hope you take away. As I say this too, this webinar is being recorded. It will go up on the Resource Hub. We will email everyone who registered and participated for this webinar the slides and the link to the recording, so you can have that post today. But really, going through these 8 things, we can't say it enough. We've said it multiple times. Setting up a recruitment plan doesn't have to be very detailed, but really setting your goals and intentions for the year, and really having some of these steps that you found work each year, documenting them can be really great and keep you kind of, I guess, going in a certain way and not having to recreate the wheel. Some of these are on serviceyear.org, proactively find candidates, use the standard required fields, but also think through about what additional supplemental questions could be good for your program. Really looking at 1 to 3 business day follow-up time. I think most programs are in that time period, but just want to reiterate it. Show real clear next steps and show interest. This idea of creating a rubric and really honing in on who might be the ideal candidate for your program. And then the last one is, again, use existing hiring processes. You don't need to reinvent the wheel for some of these things. And with that, I'm going to go to Q&A and see if there's any questions that we have in the chat or in the Q&A chat box.
So it looks like we do have a question coming in about challenges with getting people to respond to follow-up emails, phone calls, suggestions. I'll start by saying that's definitely something we've heard both for people applying through serviceyear.org or people applying through other channels, that not hearing from candidates or having candidate drop-off can be a real challenge. One thing that I would say that we would definitely be interested to see is if you have existing examples of like templates or strategies that you're currently using in that space. That's something that we're trying to think through how we can provide really strong guidance around strategies for that. I don't know that anyone's ever going to get to a 100% response rate. That does seem to be a thematic thing about people applying both to service year opportunities and to jobs, that there is just like some level of no response that's always going to happen. But definitely like one of the things we have on our radar is trying to think through how we can be supportive in terms of minimizing some of that, whether that's strategies around how quickly you're able to follow up with someone, strategies around what that follow-up looks like, which we've started work on a little bit as well. So definitely I would say like this is a space where we would say more openly, if you have existing things you're doing in there, we'd love to see you send that stuff over. And if you do have anything that you think is working particularly well in that space, that's also the type of stuff we'd love to hear as well. Because again, the notion of not reinventing the wheel, we always like anecdotally hear things that work really well from specific programs. And one of our big goals is to also think through how we can take some of those things that are working on a micro level and help translate them across to other programs as well.
Yeah, and one we heard from a program recently was in this space was instead of doing a phone call or email, since younger people are really into text, is they've gone into just texting the candidate and saying, you know, like, we really would like to follow up with you. Are you interested or not? I'm being quite blunt here, but like they have language for it, and that seems to get a response from them because they're used to texting with their friends. So, you know, it's something to consider here. But to Jonas's point, we're always looking for things that are working in the field and trying to get that out to everybody so that you know, people can try things that might help them in their recruitment process. We also had up here just, you know, back to how to use core members. You know, one program was testing out group interview activities on, you know, to get feedback. So they're using kind of a cohort group setting, interview setting, and with their core members, which is kind of a nifty idea. We did get a question about so this is on the capacity building side, so I think Vista maybe, is can you code a current member's time because technically in capacity building they're not supposed to do direct service, so is recruitment considered a direct service activity?
That one, I don't know that we can give an exact answer to in terms of how that time needs to be coded, so I'll maybe kick that back out if any other program staff on in AmeriCorps programs specifically have any thoughts about coding time for that. Transparently, that's a few years back since I've had to think about that directly. But I know that is something that whether it's a fully scoped role for members or just something they're doing for, generally we'd be looking at a pretty small portion of their time, that would be something they can help out with.
We also had another tip up here. What I really like is one of the programs said if they're on a fence about a candidate, they'll actually have a currently serving core member call them and do a phone screen to kind of help them out. That's a really great tip. One program to this question said you could put it in training and professional development.
Great. Thank you for the recommendation there.
Any other questions or things that are working well that you would like to surface for folks? While we are getting more questions and answers, I'm going to go to the last slide, but we still do want to take question answers just because I want to highlight. We talked about this webinar is part of a three-part series. So the first one was in February, and we're having the middle one here, which is really finding the candidate and interviewing. The next one, which Jonas already alluded to, is around now that you've accepted a candidate, how do you engage them to day one of service, and some of those things that you might want to think about for onboarding, and some kind of features that we have on serviceyear.org that might help you with all of this. So that will be in June, and I'm going to put a link so people can register today if they want to and get all set up for the June 20th. But we will remind folks through our normal channels of the connector and as the date gets closer. So we don't see any more questions or comments. I want to thank everyone for attending today. Again, the next steps will be we will send out a debrief email that includes the link to this webinar and the slides. It will also include, it will come from me, Brian Hall, and we'll CC Jonas. So if you have any questions after this, you can get in touch with us directly. We really appreciate all that you do, programs for the service field, and also for all the impact that you do in the communities throughout the United States. We really thank you for creating this opportunity for young people to serve and really help the beneficiaries and youth in communities.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining, and also again really appreciate the questions, ideas, feedback you were able to share during the session. If you do think of other stuff afterwards, please don't hesitate to send any of that stuff our way, because that's stuff that we would love to continue to see.
Great. Thank you.